At the family meeting after my grandmother's funeral, Brandon stood at the head of the table like he'd been crowned king. "The 8 rental houses are officially mine," he announced, and the room erupted applause, whistles, even a proud tear from my mother. My father leaned back, satisfied. Brandon smirked at me. "And Emily? She gets nothing." A few cousins laughed. I didn't. I just watched silent steady while something cold settled in my chest. But what they didn't know was, before I go on, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family. Stories like this are heavier when you've lived through something similar, that moment when everyone else is celebrating a lie and you're the only one holding the truth. Now let me tell you how it all began. I grew up in a house where attention didn't flow, it pointed, and it always pointed toward Brandon. My earliest memories are proof of that. I was 6 the year he turned 10. The kitchen was drowning in blue balloons frosting thick on a 3-layer cake so heavy Dad needed both hands to carry it. Everyone gathered around him like he was a tiny celebrity. I stood near the counter with an empty plate waiting for someone to remember I existed. By the time Mom noticed me, most of the frosting was gone. That was the first moment I learned how easy it was for a child to disappear in her own home. My birthdays were quieter, not by accident but by design. One year, Mom forgot candles entirely and stuck a tea light in the center of a grocery store cupcake. "You're my easy one," she said, brushing past me as if the phrase was a compliment. I smiled because learning to swallow disappointment was something I mastered early. School didn't offer much refuge. Teachers loved Brandon's loud confidence. He made jokes, charmed adults filled every room like a spotlight was following him. I was the quiet one who finished worksheets too fast and read books at recess. When I won a statewide writing competition, the office almost forgot to announce it. Mom picked us up that afternoon, celebrating Brandon's soccer tryouts. My certificate with the gold seal stayed in my backpack the entire drive home. Christmas only sharpened what I already knew. Brandon unwrapped a brand new gaming console, then sneakers he'd circled in a catalog for weeks. Ethan got toys with worn edges from cousins. Mom handed me a journal she said she found on sale. "Perfect for someone thoughtful like you," she said. "Thoughtful, the label families use when they don't know what else to call you." But the deepest cut came at 17. I earned a full scholarship, out of state tuition, housing, books, everything. I waited all day for Dad to come home so I could tell him. He didn't look up from his dinner plate when I did. "Well," he said, "someone has to leave Florida eventually." Mom nodded, calling it practical. Practical, another word that meant they didn't have to invest anything in me. Meanwhile, Brandon stayed home and slid straight into the rental business Grandpa once built. He bragged about helping, even though helping meant depositing checks and taking pictures of cracked driveways. They praised him like he was saving the family empire. That was when the quiet in me changed. It wasn't the silence of someone ignored, it was the silence of someone planning a way out. The day I left for Atlanta, the sun was so bright it made the pavement shimmer. I loaded the last of my things into my old Honda clothes, a lamp, the journal Mom thought would keep me busy, and drove north until Florida flattened behind me. It felt like my lungs were expanding for the first time. The further the state line shrank in my rearview mirror, the more I realized I wasn't running from them. I was running toward myself. I didn't know it then, but my escape would become the very thing that saved me later. Atlanta didn't look like freedom. At first, it felt like emptiness. A small studio with thin walls and a dishwasher that groaned louder than traffic. But it was the first place where I could hear my own thoughts without Brandon's voice drowning them out. My job as a compliance analyst wasn't glamorous, but it made sense to me. Columns, numbers, patterns. The kind of order no one in my family ever gave me. I stayed late some nights, the glow of my monitor painting my hands in cold blue light, listening to the quiet hum of a life that finally belonged to me. Then one Thursday my phone rang. Grandma Margaret. Her voice was rougher than usual, like wind scraping across seashells. "Come down this weekend," she said. "We need to talk." She didn't explain, and she never said anything without a reason. When I pulled into her driveway in St. Petersburg the next morning, the porch fan was spinning slow circles above her. 2 folders sat neatly on the table beside her rocking chair. She didn't offer a hug. She wasn't the type. She simply tapped the table. "Start with the blue one." Inside were rent logs, expense sheets, repair claims. At first glance, the numbers seemed fine. But the longer I looked, the more they pulled apart. Payments missing. Repairs charged twice. Receipts that didn't exist. 18 months of money disappearing under Brandon's management. My throat tightened. "He's been stealing from you." She didn't blink. From me, from the tenants, from the business. I gave him a chance to learn responsibility. He learned entitlement instead. Then she pushed the second folder toward me. "Open it." Living trust documents. 8 deeds. All signed. All notarized. All completed 2 years ago. When I looked up, she was watching me with an expression I'd never seen on anyone in my family, unwavering belief. "You're the successor," she said. "Not because you asked. Because you're the only one who won't ruin this." I must have looked confused because she took a slow breath and added, "Your father once tried to force me to sign everything to him. He yelled Emily, said I was being unfair. I recorded him. I kept it. And I swore I'd protect what I built. Her voice didn't shake. Mine did. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because timing matters more than truth, she said. And the timing is now. We signed the last set of papers that Monday. The notary sat across from us, while the ceiling fan ticked like a slow heartbeat. When the ink dried, Grandma poured 2 small glasses of bourbon. She lifted hers. Paper outlives promises. Remember that. I didn't know how important that sentence would become. Not until after her funeral, when the only person who'd ever seen me without comparison was gone, and the rest of the family finally showed me exactly who they'd always been. Her death didn't just leave an empty chair. It triggered something far uglier, something that had been waiting beneath the surface for years, and I was about to walk straight into it. The day of Grandma Margaret's funeral felt wrong from the moment I stepped out of the car. Florida heat pressed against my skin like a hand trying to shove me back inside. Relatives crowded the church lawn, but the center of gravity was unmistakable Brandon. People surrounded him with sympathy he hadn't earned, shaking his hand, clapping his shoulder, talking about the future of the family business as if he'd built any part of it. I hovered at the edges, the scent of lilies and old carpet mixing into something that made my stomach tighten. I hadn't cried yet. I wanted to, but grief had been pushed aside by something colder, a quiet awareness that the moment Grandma died, the mask everyone wore around me had slipped. During the reception, I overheard voices near the refreshment table. Richard must be relieved. Brandon will keep everything running. I heard he's inheriting all 8 houses. What about Emily? A shrug. She lives in Atlanta. She doesn't need any of this. I carried those words like stones in my pocket. After the reception, Dad called what he dramatically labeled a family conversation. That phrase had always meant I was about to lose something. We gathered in the dining room, Dad at the head, Mom hovering anxiously, Brandon leaning back with confidence so big it barely fit in the chair. Ethan sat near the corner, hands folded, eyes down. Dad slid a paper toward me. This is a simple waiver. Since Brandon's been managing everything here in Florida, it makes sense for him to take full responsibility. Signing this prevents confusion. Confusion. That was the word he used to describe erasing me. Mom offered a tight smile. Honey, it's not personal. You're building a life in Atlanta. This keeps the peace. The peace she meant was the same peace she'd chosen my entire childhood, the kind where I stayed small so no one had to adjust their comfort. Brandon tapped a pen against the table with a smirk. Come on, Emily. Let's not drag this out. Just sign. No lawyers, no drama. The paper listed all 8 properties neatly typed, ready for me to disappear. I looked at each of them. Dad's impatience. Mom's forced softness. Brandon's entitlement, then pushed the waiver back across the table. I'm not signing. Silence cracked through the room. Dad straightened. Don't start. Brandon scoffed. Emily, it's not like you ever mattered in this business anyway. That line didn't sting. It confirmed everything I already knew. It was the moment something inside me locked into place. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just stood up, grabbed my keys, and walked out. Behind me, I heard Brandon mutter, "She'll come around." He had no idea who I was anymore. The drive back to Atlanta was long and dark, but it didn't feel like running. It felt like alignment. My phone buzzed, relentlessly calls, guilt trips, demands. But I didn't bother flipping it over. When I reached my apartment just before dawn, the city was still asleep. I didn't turn on the lights. I walked straight to the shelf, took down the fireproof folder, and began laying out every document Grandma had protected for me. The trust, the deeds, the proof Brandon hoped no one would find. Each page clicked into place like pieces of a puzzle they'd always underestimated. That night, for the first time, I understood they weren't just trying to take something from me, they were trying to erase me. And I wasn't going to let them. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I worked. I opened a blank spreadsheet and let the truth organize itself. Rent payments, maintenance logs, dates, signatures. Brandon's sloppy trail of arrogance was all there, just waiting for someone willing to look. With each row I filled, the fear inside me thinned and something steadier took its place. By sunrise, sunlight spilled across my dining table, turning the documents pale gold. The moment was almost peaceful, until my phone lit up again. Mom, sweetheart, let's not make this ugly. Dad, you're being emotional. Think of the family. Brandon, you better not pull anything. Seriously. I muted the thread. Around noon, I stepped onto my balcony. Atlanta air was warm but not suffocating like Florida. Cars hummed below, indifferent to everything unraveling in my life. That indifference was grounding. For once, the world wasn't siding with Brandon. It wasn't siding with anyone. It was just there. A place where I could choose for myself. 2 days later, a knock rattled my door. Light hesitant. When I opened it, Ethan stood there, hands shoved deep into the pockets of his hoodie. Can I talk to you? He asked. We sat on the couch. He couldn't meet my eyes at first, but when he finally did, his voice cracked. I heard Brandon threaten Grandma once. My stomach sank. Threaten her how? She asked him about missing rent money. He told her if she kept micromanaging him, she'd regret it.
And you just say normal hands outside?
I didn't know what to do. It wasn't shock, I felt it was recognition. This was who Brandon had always been. Without consequences, entitlement grows teeth. You're telling me now, I said quietly. That matters. After Ethan left, I drove to St. Petersburg to see Mrs. Lila Porter, Grandma's neighbor. Her house smelled like lavender and warm dust. She greeted me with a hug so tight it broke something open in my chest I didn't realize I'd been holding together. I figured you'd come, she said. Your grandmother left something for you. She brought out a small USB. This is a recording, she said. Your father tried to force her to sign everything into his name years ago. She recorded the argument. She told me to keep it safe. I curled my fingers around the USB. It felt heavier than metal, heavier than proof. It felt like validation. On my drive back, Dad called. And called. And called. I finally answered. Emily, he said, voice strained. I talked to Rick. He says ownership can be challenged. Rick, his go-to lawyer, the same man who notarized half of Grandma's documents. He notarized the trust, Dad, I said. He knows it's valid. Silence, the kind that reveals more than shouting ever could. Emily, he said finally, don't do something you'll regret. I already regret not seeing this sooner, I replied and hung up. By the time I got home, the anger was gone. What settled in its place wasn't fire, it was precision. I spent the evening scanning documents, labeling files, creating backups. I wasn't building a weapon. I was exposing what already existed. The next morning, before the sun rose, I packed everything into my suitcase, printed deeds, the trust, the spreadsheet, the USB, every receipt Brandon hoped no one would trace. It all fit neatly, almost politely, as if it knew it was waiting for this moment. At 9 a.m., Brandon sent one last message. We're doing the announcement Saturday. Dad wants you there. Don't make this a circus. A celebration? A coronation? A performance built on a lie they all believed would stay buried. I stared at the message, feeling an unfamiliar calm settle over me. They had chosen the stage, but they had forgotten who held the script. And this time, I wasn't coming as the quiet daughter. I was coming as the truth they were never prepared for. The afternoon of the party felt like stepping into a staged lie. The Carter house buzzed with voices and clinking glasses, the kind of noise people make when they're celebrating something they think is guaranteed. Cars packed the driveway, relatives spilled onto the lawn, and through the windows I could see a slideshow of Brandon grinning beside rental signs like he was the self-made king of Florida real estate. I rolled my suitcase up the walkway. Every turn of the wheels clicked against the concrete, steady, deliberate, impossible to ignore. When I stepped inside, the room didn't go silent immediately. It stalled, conversations dipped, eyes turned. My mother froze mid-sentence. My father stiffened beside the bar cart. Brandon stood in the middle, dressed like success, arms open wide as if the applause had never ended. He smirked. Well, look who finally showed up. Come to congratulate me? I didn't answer. I walked past him and stopped at the center table. The suitcase handle felt cool in my hand as I pressed both latches. Snap, snap. Those two sounds cut through the room like glass breaking. Emily, Dad warned, voice low. Don't start. I didn't look at him. I lifted the first deed, laid it flat on the table, then the second, then the third. Each document landed like a heartbeat. Conversations died. The slideshow on the TV flicked to the next image, Brandon holding a clipboard, but no one was watching anymore. Mr. Dean Morales, the family lawyer, pushed through the crowd. He picked up a deed, scanned it, then looked at me with something dangerously close to respect. He cleared his throat. These are recorded documents, he announced. All 8 properties were placed in a living trust 2 years ago. Margaret Hayes is the trustee. Emily Carter is the legal successor. It felt like the air snapped. What? Brandon barked. He grabbed a deed and flipped through it, frantic. No, this is fake. She doesn't even live here. Mr. Morales straightened. I notarized several of these myself. Nothing here is fake. Dad moved forward, face draining of color. Emily, where did you? I still didn't look at him. Then Ethan's voice rose from the crowd, shaking but clear. She didn't fake anything. He stepped beside me, finally choosing a side out loud. I drove Grandma to the notary. She told me Emily was the only one who wouldn't lose herself over this. Brandon stared at him, betrayed. You knew. Ethan didn't flinch. I knew the truth. You just never cared about the truth. Before anyone could recover, another voice entered the room. Soft, older, familiar. Mrs. Lila Porter stepped forward, holding a small USB, and Margaret wanted this kept safe. She placed it on the table beside the deeds. It's the recording of Richard trying to pressure her years ago. She said Emily would know what to do with it. Dad's knees seemed to give out for a second. Mom's hand flew to her mouth. Brandon looked around, desperately waiting for someone to defend him, someone to save the narrative he'd built. No one moved. The truth sat between us, quiet, undeniable, exactly the way Grandma intended. I finally looked up at Brandon. His chest was heaving, his confidence cracked open. He met my eyes, expecting anger or gloating or explanation. What he saw was nothing but calm. He always mistook my silence for weakness. Tonight, he finally learned what silence looks like when it's loaded with truth. I left Florida before the sun even considered rising. The sky was a soft, unfinished gray, the kind that makes everything look quieter than it really is. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look back. The house behind me was still full of people processing the truth they never thought would surface. And honestly, that was closure enough. My suitcase sat in the back seat, no longer a weapon, just a container holding what was mine, what had always been mine. The highway stretched out empty in front of me, and for the first time in years, I felt the road wasn't leading me away from something. It was leading me towards something bigger than any of them could understand. By the time I reached Atlanta, the city was waking up. Streetlights flickered off one by one, coffee shops rolled up their metal shutters, and early commuters leaned into their routines. My apartment smelled like detergent and last night's air. It felt honest, something my family never was. I unpacked slowly, deliberately. Then I pulled the fireproof folder from the suitcase and placed it on the highest shelf of my closet. Not hidden, not protected, just settled. The way truth settles when it no longer has to fight for space. I made coffee and stepped onto the balcony. Traffic hummed below. A dog barked somewhere down the block. The world moved on, unaware of the small war I'd just survived. I breathed in the morning air and realized something I'd never allowed myself to feel before: peace. Not the peace my mother always preached, the kind where I silently accepted their version of me. A different kind, a peace built from choice. I knew the fallout wasn't finished. Brandon wouldn't accept losing. Dad wouldn't accept being outmaneuvered. Mom would try to stitch the family back together with denial and excuses. Let them try. They built a world where they thought I would always step aside. But now they had to live in the world where I finally stepped forward. And this time, I wasn't the one who should be afraid of the truth. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, hit subscribe. Stories like this aren't rare. Most people just stay silent because it's easier than being called dramatic. But you deserve to be heard. Tell me where you're watching from, and which part of my story hit you the hardest. And stay close. Because the fallout from that night didn't end when I drove back to Atlanta. If anything, it was only the beginning.